let's take a look at this Shakla Vitaria here on Daf Vav Amud Aleph, very profound and very challenging. The Gemara is now saying that from the Brisa that entertains a Havamina, that we would build the Beis Hamikdash even on Shabbos, we would conclude that the mitzvah of Yibum would apply even in the case of Achos Ishto. Shabbos, after all, no less than Achos Ishto, is a Chiyuv Kares. The case of Shabbos is different than every other Lotas set. It's being upgraded because of the very severe and high-powered nature, if I can call it that, of Shmir Shabbos. And we have a mitzvah of Kvod HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Shabbos, and that's why the Torah says, Eshab Sosei Tishmoru Ani Hashem, and we trump the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash. If not for the special status of Shabbos, then we would override the Shabbos with a regular essay of Binyan Beis HaMikdash and a regular Lotaseh, even if it had a Chiyuv Kares. Now, the question is, it seems like a secondary question, but we really have to raise the issue of this brisa. What was the Havamina? What kind of Binyan Beis HaMikdash are we talking about? What do I mean? Obviously, there's only one type of Binyan Beis HaMikdash. But what type of violation of the Shabbos are we talking about? You know, can you imagine Shlomo Melech is building the first Beis HaMikdash, and there are supplies and stones, you know, big Yerushalmi stones that are being transported. You can imagine, you know, if you've ever seen Nachum Goldman, you know, his paintings, you know, you've got these, you have a whole slew of donkeys, you know, that are carrying all this stuff for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Is that what we're talking about? Or is this brisa talking about a case of actual binyan, where they take the stone, they plaster the stone below it, and place this stone on top of the stone below it, and that's Meleches Bona. My love, should we assume that in the context of this brisa that suggests that Binyan Beis HaMikdash would override Shabbos, Bibona v'Soser? When you build a structure, you're involved in two different malachas. It might be Binyan, it might be Soser. It might be Soser in the sense that sometimes the stone is not fitting properly. You know, it's like, if I can give a horrible example from a dentist, you know, it's like a loose tooth, and sometimes you may have to extract it. So you have to take out this stone and replace it. That's called Meleches Soser, another one of the 39 malachas on Shabbos. And therefore, why is it that we're not going to allow these malachas to be implemented on Shabbos for the sake of Binyan Beis HaMikdash? Because that Shabbos is on a very, very high level, as we said, high stature. Halav hachi. If we weren't dealing with that kind of a lav that was on such a high level of Eshab Sosei Tishmoru, then we would have applied the principle of Esei Docha Losaseh, even though it's a Losaseh Yeshbo Kares. And therefore, I would have concluded that the same thing applies to Yibum. And therefore, Yibum, as an essay, would be Docha Alav Sheyeshbo Kares. The Gemara says, lo, that's not what the Brisa is referring to. There was never a Havamina that Meleches, Soser, or Bona would override the Shabbos for the sake of the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash, but rather, Lav de Mechamer. As we said before, you've got all these animals, beasts of burden, that are carrying the supplies and the stones, you know, up to Harabayis for the sake of building the Beis HaMikdash, and we want to know if we're allowed to use these animals on Shabbos, and the answer is, Kulchem Chayovim B'chvodi, that the Torah requires Shmir Shabbos. And then we're going to come to the conclusion that if you had an essay being docha, a regular lotase, meaning a lotase she'ein bo kares, like machamer on Shabbos, then you could possibly apply the principle of essay docha losase, but not in the case of yibum with achos ishto, with it, which is a lav she'esh bo kares. The Gemara asks the following kasha: V'afilu hachi lo dochi. Are you telling me now, this is a very parallel mirror image, shakla to what we saw before when we were talking about Bishul versus Machamer in Kibbutz. You're telling me that Binyan Beis Hamikdash is not doche, doesn't override the lav of Machamer as a regular Machamer, afilu hachi, even though there's no karis involved in Machamer. Nevertheless, the Torah is telling me lo dachi, ela de kaimel on essay dochalosa ligmar mehacha de lo dachi. Why don't we derive from the conclusion here that the essay of Binyan Beis Hamikdash, in the case of Machamer, does not override the Shabbos, that an essay cannot be overriding a lotas v'chitem, and you'll give me the same answer that we had before. Shani lavi the Shabbos l'chambiri. Maybe what the Torah is saying is that bi'alma, if it would be a regular losas, then an essay would trump a losas. This is the exception to the rule because of the chambira of Shabbos. As we said, a Machal Shabbos is like an Oved Avodah Zarah, and he's a Mumar L'Kol Torkula, and he's Chayav Misa, etc., etc. But if it would have been a regular lot, not like Mechamer on Shabbos, then we would apply the principle that we derive from Kalayim B'tzitzis, that Esei Dochalosas. No. It's not going to do it. Why? Hatana B'Almakoi, Veloka part. Once again, we're going to quote the Brisa to prove that even B'Alma, we're going to derive from this pasuk that we won't override a regular lav, not a lav of Shabbos, which has the Chamiri of Shabbos, and we're going to derive it from this pasuk of Eshab Sosai Tishmoru. Ani Hashem, the son Yochel Omelo Aviv. His son, the Kohen, was told and commanded by his father, Hitame, I want you to go into Beis HaKvaros, and I left my eyeglasses there, so please bring it back. Oh, Shamalo, his father said to him, bring me some good steak, V'al Tachzer, and don't pay any attention to the Aveda that you found, and violate the Isur Lav of Lo Sucha L'Salam, Yochel Yishmalo. Should he violate the Lav of Tumas Kohanim, or the Lav of Haloma from an Aveda for the sake of Kibbutz? Talmud Lomar, Ish Imo V'Ov Tiro, V'Shabsosei Tishmor Ani Hashem, Kulchem Chayov B'Chvodi. So we're deriving from this pasuk, by analogy, other lavin. We're no longer limited to Shabbos. In Shabbos, you could say, well, you know what? It's because of the special upgraded status of Shabbos. But as far as other lavin is concerned, Ein Achinami Kibbutz Avayim would override the other lavin. And you see from this brisa that we're equating Shabbos with other lavin. And to the same extent that we don't override the Shabbos, we won't override Tumas Kohanim. We won't override Shabbos Haveda, Lava Lo Sucha L'Salein. So then we should come to the conclusion that whatever smichas haparshias we had between Kalayim and Tzitzis to derive Esei Dochalosa, throw that overboard. And Ein Esei Dochalosas. And that's all if you assume that this price is talking about Machamer, which is a regular lot. So the Gemara is now proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that within the framework of this drasha of Eshapsosi Tishmoru, we're not classifying Shabbos as different than any other lot. Or perhaps we could say it a little, water it down a little. We don't have to say it's so extreme, but at least the lav of Machamer on Shabbos is not a desecration of the Shabbos itself. and it doesn't have the status of lav the Shabbos Chamiri. But in any event, we certainly derive from this drasha that kibbud av ha'em does not override any lav, not Shabbos and not Tumas Kohanim and not Lo Suchal Asami, not Shabbos Aved. If that be the case, then we're in trouble. Why? Let's make the cheshbon. You cannot utilize the principle of shiny lavig the Shabbos the Chamiri. And now we're in a bind because why don't we derive from this that ain't Esei Dochalosa? Throw out the entire enterprise of Esei Dochalosa. The answer has to be that we're talking about a malach of Shabbos. And that's a lav sheish bo kares. So that the exception to the rule of Esei Dochalosa is a lav sheish bo kares. And the Torah is telling me that kibbud av ha'em cannot be dochel lav sheish bo kares, but other mitzvahs like yibum would in fact be dochel lav sheish bo kares. Just 1 second. There's something here that bothers my mind. 1 second. So what about the cases of Tumas Kohanim and Lo Suchalis Alem? Those are regular lavin. There's no kares. What am I missing here? 1 second. I'm missing some piece of the puzzle. So again, the Gemara is now justified based on the drasha of the brisa of Ani Hashem Eshapsos Tishmaru, the need for the pasuk leha in the case of yibum of achos ishto, where we would apply the principle of esei docha losas sheyeshbo kares, and that's the essay of yibum. The exception to that rule of esei docha losas sheyeshbo kares is kibbud av ha'em, because of kulchem chayovim bichvod. Oh, now I got it. So in the cases of Tumas Kohanim and Lo Suchalis Alem, once again, we're going to apply the principle of Kulchem Chayov B'Chvod. Excellent. Excellent. Now we have that Eshapsosi Tishma Ani Hashem is downgrading the status of Kibbud Av Ha'em vis-a-vis all other mitzvahs, despite its greatness and its Hukash Kvodam L'Kodam Mokom, etc., because of the principle Kulkam Chayov B'Chvodi, and that's going to apply when there's a conflict between Kibbud Av Ha'em and any lav in the Torah, whether it be Shabbos, which is a lav sheish bo kares, or whether it be the lav of Lo Suchalis Alem or Tumas Kohanim, which is a lav shein bo kares, because Kulchem Chayovim B'Chvodi. But what would be in a case of a different essay, like Yibum, where we don't have Kulchem Chayovim B'Chvodi, then we're going to derive from Shabbos, meaning Basheli or Shchotli, that essay docha losaseh afilu losaseh sheyesh bo kares. Now we're up to the words Ela Mishum De'ikal and Mifrach. Okay, let's see if we can figure that out. So again, at this point, from the fact that, 1 second, we go back to, let's go back to Binyan Beis Hamikdash for a minute, right? We had a brisa that entertained the Havamina that Binyan Beis Hamikdash would override Shabbos if not for the principle of Kulchem Chayovim B'chvod. But that would imply that if not for Kulchem Chayovim B'chvodi, we would say Esei Dochalos. Ela mishum di ikol mifrach mala hanoch shekein hechsher mitzvah. You want to derive the conclusion that if not for Kulchem Chayov B'chvodi, the mitzvah of kibbutz of Binyan Beis Hamikdash would override the Shabbos. So we see hence that Esei Docha Los Aseh, even a Los Sheish Bo Kares. No. We're going to downgrade the mitzvah of Binyan Beis Hamikdash, even when he's building one stone on top of the other, shekein hechsher mitzvah. Meaning there's no way of violating, there's no way of fulfilling the essay of Binyan Beis Hamikdash without violating the law of Binyan on Shabbos in this case. I mean, you can't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden the Mikdash is a complete structure. So you have no choice here. And that's why there's a compelling reason, if not for Hashem, to override Shabbos for the sake of Binyan Beis Hamikdash. But that doesn't prove a thing about Yibum, where he has another option to fulfill his obligation without violating the law, sheyesh bo kares in this case, of achos ishta. Which means, again, we're back to square one, and we have not justified the need for the drasha of Aleh. We would know for sure that under these circumstances, we would force him to circumvent the violation of the law of achos ishta by giving the Yevamot chalitza. So I'm very excited now about this kasha. The Gemara is saying that you cannot derive from Binyan Beis Hamikdash, where you have no other option, that Yibum should override the law of Sheish Bokos of Achos Ishta because he has another option, and that would be to give a chalitza. Now, again, I'm very excited about this, except for one problem. We have not solved the Aleh issue. So in that sense, I'm really in a minus, not in a plus. So at this point, I think the Gemara is going to say that we can derive from Binyan Beis Hamikdash that Esei Docha Los Aseh Sheyesh Bo Kares, and by analogy, let's put it this way, it's a fair analogy to Yibum, that Yibum would override Achos Ishta. So the Gemara says, Hechsher mitzvah, Tepuk le'mei hasam. All right, this is a doozy. I plead the fifth here. The only way I can get through this piece of Gemara of Tepuk le'mei hasam is by presenting a long note in the Masechet. Is that okay, Jeff? Can you give me a thumbs up on that? I usually like to try to interpret the Gemara myself, but in this case, I need the help of Masechet. Okay. He says the following. So it's a pretty long note, so bear with me. Efshal l'lomdo the mitzvahs kibud av she'ena docha Shabbos af she'hechsher mitzvah the im loba kosuv umikdashai tiro el lamdenu she'hechsher mitzvah docha losase sheish bo kares array ain't circle limud nosaf l'shem kachel kvar lamadnu zos mikibud av b'Shabbos shahoisa haShabbos nidches mishum kibud av lule hamiut ha'omur. Vim came behechrich sheba kosmik doche tirol amdenu shaf b'mokum she'ein d'chias alav sheyesh bo koris hechsher mitzvah kigon yibum b'achos isha min aroi she'idochel itzu b'shvila esek. Now, if I understand this correctly, and I'm going to really, I'm putting my head on the line here, on the chopping board. The Gemara Tepukle Me Hasam is utilizing a methodology which is called Im'eno Inyan. I have to move these books. Oh. Now, what is Im'eno Inyan? When the Torah teaches me a halacha in case X, and then I have a problem because maybe case X is the exception rather than the rule, and then I can't create a binyan av to derive from X other cases by analogy, then if I find elsewhere that the Torah gave me the same conclusion and taught it to me in a different context, then I ask myself, why did the Torah have to bother with that? That's called an Eno Inyan. And that's going to allow me to expand and apply the original principle despite whatever that reasoning was that would make it the exception to the rule. So an Eno Inyan is always there for two reasons. First of all, to repeat that which we already derived. And number two, by the fact that the Torah repeated unnecessarily, it must be that the Torah is telling me that that reason number X, which forced you to limit the original limud, doesn't apply. We can drop that restriction. All right, let's see if I can fit Eno Inyan here into our discussion. We have here, on the one hand, a derivation from Eshabsosai Tishmoru Ani Hashem, which is written right after Kibbud Av Ha'em, to teach me that the mitzvah Kibbud Av Ha'em does not override the Shabbos. But you'll tell me that doesn't prove anything for our purposes because that's called a Hefcher mitzvah, meaning the only way he could achieve the essay, to achieve his goal of Kibbud Av Ha'em, is if he violates the Shabbos by cooking on Shabbos. He has no other option. That's called Hechsher Mitzvah. And that factor called Hechsher Mitzvah is now going to, like an arrow, shoot down the bird, the great bird of Kibbud Av is Docha Shabbos. No, it's not Docha Shabbos because that's Shavshosei Tichmoru. And we're going to say that there was a Havamina that if not for Kulchem Chayom Bechvodi Ani Hashem, then we would have overridden the Shabbos despite the fact that it's a Chiv Kares. And the answer is no. That's only because it's Hechsher Mitzvah. How do I know that Esei Docha Losaseh, when it's not a Hechsher Mitzvah, meaning when the essay could be fulfilled and achieved without violating the law? Unless I have another drasha which would be superfluous, and then I apply the methodology of Himeno Inyan. Oh. Now, let's fast forward to the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash. And the Torah says, Mikdashai Tiro, and we have to build the Beis Hamikdash. Then the Torah says, Eshabsosai Tishmoru, Umikdashai Tiro, right? I just want to check out the psukim for a minute, if you don't mind. Just want to make sure I don't say anything that's total mistake here. Let's see. Oh, let's see what we have over here. We have one second. Why am I missing it here? Is this my fault or the Gemara's fault here? The printing. Just one second. If I could see, let me just see this Gimel over here. Oh. Vayikra Yutes Gimel. See, now we're talking about, very good. Vayikra Yutes Lamet. The two different psukim. Oh, this could be good. I'm going to take out a chumash here. We're going to open up to Parsas Kedoshim, Vayikra Yutes, and we're going to look at two psukim. Okay. Now, at the very beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, which opens with Perek Yutes, it says, Ish imo v'yoviv tirovek shabsosei tishmoru ani Hashem Elokeichem. Now let's fast forward in the same chapter, Pasuk Lamed. Eshavsosei tishmoru mikdashei tiro ani Hashem. Interesting. Those same words, Eshavsosei tishmoru ani Hashem, appear twice in the same chapter, 19, in the book of Leviticus. But the first time it appears in the context of Ish imo v'yoviv tiro. In the second, Mikdashai tiro. And we had, if you recall, two drushas. One drasha that we don't override the Shabbos for the sake of Kibbutz Av, and the other drasha that we don't override the Shabbos for the sake of Binyan Beis Hamikdash. But why do we need both drushas? Why did the Torah have to repeat it twice? Again, reading the words here, he says, Kvar lo madnu mi Kibbutz Av ha'eh b'Shabbos shal hoisa Shabbos nidches mi panov lule ha'miut ha'amur. We would override the Shabbos for the sake of Kibbutz Av ha'eh, if not for the miut of any Hashem, etc. And now the Torah is telling me again, Mikdashai tiro, with again a kind of svara of kulchem chayavim bechvodi, right? That was the language of the brisa earlier here on this Amud, correct? The Sanya Yochliye Binyan Beis Hamikdash Docha Shabbos Talmud Lomar. Now we're quoting pasuk Lamed in Perikutes. Eshav Sosi Tishma Mikdashay Tiro Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi. So the same Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi that you are deriving from Mikdashay Tiro Ani Hashem, you've already derived it from an earlier pasuk in the same chapter with regard to each imo v'yaviv tiro that kulchem chayov bechvodi. So why would the Torah have to repeat the same drasha twice? And the answer must be that the Mikdashay Tiro is teaching me that even if there's no hechsher mitzvah, I would still override the law. Again, there certainly is a hechsher mitzvah, because how can you build the Beis Hamikdash without violating the Shabbos? There's no other alternative. But why would the Torah have to repeat the same limud of Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi twice? The Ani Hashem twice. Eshav Sosi Tishmor Ani Hashem. Not to override the Shabbos for the sake of Kibud Av, and again, not to override the Shabbos for the sake of Binyan Beis Hamikdash. It's unnecessary. And in both cases, it's hechsher mitzvah, meaning I need the mitzvah desperately. Let me say it better than that. I need the averas halav or the chil Shabbos desperately in order to achieve the mitzvah. I don't have another option. So why would the Torah have to repeat itself twice? And we're going to have to answer that the twice is coming as a pircha to reject what we call shekain hechsher mitzvah. That the essay dochalosa would apply even if there was no hechsher mitzvah. For example, chalitza, which is an option in the context of yibum with achos ishto. So at this point in the sugya, what we've basically have accomplished is that if not for the exceptional cases, two exceptional cases of Ani Hashem, we would have overridden the Shabbos, despite the fact that it's a lav sheish bo kares, for the sake of an essay. And even if that essay is not a hechsher mitzvah, it has another alternative, we will still violate the Shabbos, namely a lav sheish bo kares, for the sake of that essay. The exception to that rule is going to be, number one, Kibud Avim, number two, Binyan Beis Hamikdash, because in both those two cases, we're going to apply the principle Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi. But in other essays, like, for example, Yibum, classic, where there is no svar of Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi, the essay will override the lav, in this case, Achos Ishto, despite the fact that it's a lav sheish bo kares, similar to the case of Shabbos. And if you'll counter-argue by saying, wait a minute, the case here of Shabbos is a case of hechsher mitzvah. There's no way I can feed my father unless I cook for him on Shabbos. And for that matter, in the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, I cannot build a Beis Hamikdash without violating soser or boneh. But the answer is, why did the Torah twice have to teach me Ani Hashem Kulchem Chayov Bechvodi, if not to establish that Esei Dochalos Haseh Sheyesh Bo Kares? Whoa. I'm telling you, this is a doozy. All right, then. So thanks, Jeff, for being with me today. And I'll wish you a